Hey everybody, I'm Scott Harkey and welcome to season 4 of Endava's Payment Talks, where we dive headfirst into understanding how companies are shaping the direction of payments innovation. This season, we're focusing on B2B payments, exploring the unique challenges and opportunities in this space. In this episode, we're honing in on building and evolving a successful retail marketplace. Joining us today is Justin Gregory, who's head of technology, payment, fraud, and tax at ASOS. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. Very good to be on board. Thank you.
Why don't we start out by getting a little bit of background on yourself? Tell us about your role and how you got into the role, and just help us understand what it is that you do.
Cool. I'll start at the beginning. I mean, my first early interactions with e-commerce and payments goes all the way back to the early noughties in the e-com space, and building up sites and implementing through some of the early, very limited and often painful payment mechanisms that were available at the time. Later moved into financial services and spent a long time in digital banking, but basically ensuring performing transactions, payments, refunds, um, transfers, everything worked at scale, worked at speed, and then moved into digital transformation within a few business units there. I leaned heavily into fintech, payment and associated technologies, simplifying combination of customer and employee interactions on our platforms. And then finally departed and most recently hopped onto the retail side of the fence, where I've been playing on the retail payment side in the UK, which has been an incredible experience. Myriad of differing challenges, opportunities, but they keep me both frustrated and engaged.
Awesome. Well, I've been in the space for a while as well, and it's definitely a dynamic space. I think one of the things that amazes me about payments is, despite the fact that the feeling we're solving much of the same problems over and over again, there's always a different way to solve them, right? There's always some new thing or some new nuance that we're working through to try to adjust for or incorporate or do better, et cetera, which is certainly part of what makes it an exciting space to work in.
Indeed.
Um, so the topic we're focusing on today is really around marketplaces. And I think we want to start by getting your perspective around just what are some of the key components of building a successful marketplace. Again, I know that evolves over time, but as we look at what it is today and what your advice would be to someone that's trying to build out a new marketplace or extend into that space today, just guidance there, and then also maybe a little bit on how you've seen that change over the years. Is what's different about building a marketplace today versus maybe 3, 5, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, overlaying a little bit, we'll dabble into a combination of the marketplace and just some of the payment complexity. I mean, the changes that ASOS has seen over the last 5 years, and from when they wanted to go down the direct-to-customer route through the partners to what's being called partner fulfills internally now. Um, Very much driven from, we've got a lot of stock that we sell that's ours. So ASOS Designs, it's roughly about half of it. And then we've got a great selection of partner brands that traditionally were sitting on the wholesale side of things. There was often instances where there were problems with whether it was sizing, whether it was availability, in terms of that wholesale model that we wanted to start expanding on, so that the customer could always purchase what they wanted at a point in time. So I think the clarity around what it is that you're actually trying to do, is it you just wanting to pass something on, or are you actually just trying to make it as good for the customer within your ecosystem as possible? And I think that's where, from an organization in our world, it's very much been focused on availability of the right stuff to the customer at a point in time when they want to do it, so that when they are shopping and they want to build out that look, they want to build out that outfit for the weekend or for the event, that they're able to get everything that they desire, and you can't just have a out of stock in place. So that's been one of the key things. The rest of it has sort of fallen into place behind that, just to be able to support that particular business model and what is it that we need to do. But it's also about being, I suppose, crystal clear on what you want to be able to do, whether it's you doing it as a regulated entity or partnering with licensed partners, and just understanding the nuances between those.
And has it always been that way, or are there dynamics that have changed, whether they're technical or they're just the market, that have really driven things more that way?
So I know and granted, a lot of this predates me. The initial stance from an ASOS perspective was we were looking to marketplace, but as a regulated entity, and we've stepped back from that. Our core focus is we are a brand for fashion loving 20 somethings. And the reason that's a big thing is that's the core focus of the business. The technology set that we're looking to run with is about making sure that they can get what they want in the right place at the right time. Um, Having to go down the path of becoming a regulated entity is just it wasn't something that was overall palatable in terms of the direction the company was taking. So then partnering with the likes of great payout solutions that are licensed, that do this day in, day out, and they understand the mechanisms that are in play around having to keep your various brand partners' funds safeguarded so that they have that comfort in you that they'll be able to get their commission at the end of every month, that you've got the ability to scale that as you want to bring more and more brands on, because ASOS is it's a large beast. But that being said, I mean, the partners that we're playing with are at a scale that's fundamentally different because they're supporting some of the largest marketplaces in the world at the moment.
And what about from a marketplace perspective? If I'm at a brand or at a company that's looking at building out a marketplace, what are the kind of trends in the industry, or what are the things that I should be looking for or thinking about as I build out that marketplace? Again, are there new capabilities available to me, or are there, is the complexity in payout methods, is that a good thing for me or a bad thing for me, or just what are some of those things that I should be thinking about?
I think it's a lot simpler than it was 5, 6 years ago. You can partner with you can partner with some of the large payment providers, and they'll do a really good job of just taking a lot of that regulatory, the whether it's the onboarding of sellers, the KYC thereof. They take a lot of that out of your hands. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to pay for it in one way or another. So you've got to figure out when you're starting out, do you want all of that overhead, or do you want to partner with someone that's going to assist you? And then you get to a critical size where you get to that critical size where you suddenly realize there's a lot that we want to bring on board. We want to have more control over this. We want a little bit more flexibility here. These are some of the things that we'd like to consider. ASOS, look, in all fairness, we've got two marketplaces for in our real estate. We've got what's called ASOS Marketplace, which is for smaller resellers, and that we've completely outsourced. It's not something that's run inside of the larger retail business. The retail business is at a much larger scale. 99% of all of our traffic is going down that path, and is where we're pushing through the serious volume. The other one's something that's really nice to have and to be able to get exposure for smaller brands. And as such, that goes down a much simpler path from a maintenance perspective in our world.
Right. That makes sense, having different approaches to different kind of market segments based on both their scale, but also the needs that they have, right? I'd assume the needs for customized flows or other elements of what a large brand or a large marketplace would look for is very different than, the smaller entity that's maybe just trying it out or just doesn't have the volume yet to make
Yeah.
that make sense. I guess if we go all the way down to the end consumer, right, and we think about what are some of the things that they're looking for in a marketplace? What a I like to try to always come at it from that perspective of it. We build things that sit in the middle of a lot of these interactions or transactions. You guys offer, products and services that again that kind of facilitate, right, this type of interaction. But if we think about the end customer, what do they care about? What are the things that make a marketplace appealing to them or that really drive success when it comes to, again, whether it's actually purchase volume or engagement or whatever the metric may be?
So, I mean, Scott, here's where it gets interesting in our world. We almost try and abstract that away from the customer. What we, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're trying to make sure that they've got access to whatever it is that they want at any point in time without us having to hold that stock. Yes, there's an element of us making sure that they're aware that it's being fulfilled by a non-ASOS center to a degree, but the vast majority of it is around just simplifying that experience from their perspective. So when they come into the site and they've got this incredible CX that goes down, I come in to look for a wedding or an event or something that's going on this weekend, and I purchase my entire outfit, then I can get everything in time from all of the suppliers. Um, Other spaces, yeah, this is where it does start getting interesting in terms of, yeah, I'd like to be able to daisy chain a number of key things onto it, whether it's things like face and body, which is still it's one of our core things, but being able to start attaching makeup and or accessories onto it. There, it would be really nice to have an extended ecosystem where you don't necessarily need the stuff on stock. You don't need the items on stock, but you can have that as a addendum to buy the look. And that's one of the key things that we're having a look at. We can play at the leading edge with our internal brand program of work called Test and React, which enables us to deliver an incredibly short turnaround times from idea through to on the site. And that's is often a nice anchor point for then being able to say, cool, this is an item that we've got up in a few weeks, put it on the site, but there's supplementary items around that, whether it's from major brands that just go and create that entire look that you want to be able to take for your night out or to that event.
Yeah, I like that perspective. I think I hear in there, one's around convenience, right? Of as you've said, having everything you need for that specific thing you're shopping for there available in one kind of interaction or one set of purchases, as opposed to piecemealing things, right? Or having to worry about, well, okay, well, I can find this, but what about that? I also love the idea of the more real-time availability of products or services. Again, that maybe whether it's trend or it's something that's demand has been driven for based on other purchasing behavior, et cetera, from others. I think those are great ways to highlight the value of the platform. If we pivot a little bit and talk about payments specifically, how do you think about the payments aspect of the marketplace and just how that kind of comes into play? Is it you've already kind of mentioned there's a lot of this stuff you try to abstract away from the customer so they're not having to worry about the complexities behind that. But for you in managing kind of that aspect of the business, how does it fit into the way you think about it?
So another one of the key things, I mean, I mentioned the CX that we've got. It really does drive hard to try and get customers to build up that basket. And I mean, it would be an incredible sadness if the payment failed, or even worse, we go back to the early noughties once again, and you've got this incredibly cumbersome, painful payment flow. So it's very, very strong on making sure that that's as slick and easy as possible. At the same time, it can't be confusing. While we operate in well over 15 odd currencies and deliver to 140 odd countries around the world, we try and simplify our payment stack as much as possible. And part of the reason for that is just to not confuse the customer. Downstream, similarly with our partner brands, it's, yeah, this is how it's going to work. This is how you're going to get the money. This is the ease that's going to come through. And this is the crew that's going to manage it on our behalf. So when you do understand that you're interacting with our payout partner, this is why. But it's just about trying to keep it simple in a very complex world.
I think that's always a great aspiration, right? It's not always quite that easy, or I should say, making it look easy is not always that easy. When it comes to selecting the payment partners that you do make part of your stack or do make part of how you integrate any one of these flows, what are some of the factors that you consider? How do you look at picking what's the right partner? Is it geographical coverage? Is it price? Is it features? Like how do you kind of look at the mix of different attributes?
Combination, and it is a bit of a balance. So our strategic partners, they need to have relevance not just within the jurisdiction, but also the demographic. It's all good and well saying, yeah, there are 80 million customers like this in the US that could potentially utilize this payment type. But if only 3 million are our target demographic, is it something that we want to go through rather than another one that's only got 10 million customers, but 8 million overlap in terms of our customer base?
Right.
So that relevance is very important. Fashion loving 20 somethings, once again, yes, that does absolutely bleed into the fashion loving 30 and 40 somethings who wish they were 20 somethings. But the reality is that it's about the relevance of those payment types. So we are very, very keen on making sure that we look at it. Brand new low penetration methods aren't necessarily on our agenda to have a look at it. Just that the integration cost and the effort all the way through is just not viable for what we want at this point. I mentioned simplicity. Simplicity is a huge part of it. Newer payment methods that are strategic generally focus heavily on CX onboarding and making it as easy as possible. And traditional methods like cards, I mean, they've evolved massively through the e-commerce growth over the decades, much more easy to interact with. And I mean, probably a good example of where it got complex, notably around Europe, was introduction of SCA and the rollout a few years ago. Initial usability issues, drop-offs in the customer journey. A lot of that's been resolved just through iterations and simplification. And it's far less of an issue today because it's more ubiquitous and it's more understood in the market. Um, yeah, the other key thing to your point is coverage across key markets. I mean, will we go into a specific currency in a specific country? Absolutely, if it's right, if it's justified. But typically, we're looking for someone that's got better coverage and the ability for us to be able to ensure that we've got, should one of our payment methods for some reason be unavailable, the customers can migrate onto another one relatively simply.
If in looking at those factors, you had to make a choice between conversion rate and customer experience, and you can't say 50-50, like which one do you lean more into?
Uh, Conversion rate with a stance on cost.
You cheated a little bit, but I'll let you have it. Um,
Yeah, with a
what
little
what
bit of an
about?
overlay.
I'm sorry, say that again.
No, with a little bit of an overlay on cost. Yeah, we've got to be
Yeah.
conscious around it. And I mean, the reality is there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's we've got to be cost conscious.
I think one of the other factors that contributes to overall cost is fraud, right? And if we think about fraud and risk kind of more generally, in the context of whether it's picking the partners or how you manage it, how do you think about those, and what kind of level of responsibility do you take as it relates to that versus what do you put on your payment partners to kind of, I'm sure there's some variation to that, but maybe more generally, just how do you think about that and how do you think about balancing that?
Yeah. Fraud's huge, massive consideration in our world, both in the payment and the refund leg. Um, we partner very closely with AI, ML enabled service providers that are they're just great because they assist us with on the fly verification and basically channeling of our payment flows to the point where we also use them for certain exemption traffic decisioning in Europe. So going down the path of TRA exemptions. Um, they're fantastic just in terms of their adaptability to trends and being able to understand the larger ecosystem. Uh, then we've got a little bit around certain configs and rules, which have certain region and or product specific behaviors that we then outline. And between that, that tends to cover us very nicely. Um, the other thing that our fraud team does in general, so my side of the world is very much around that integration into this provider, making sure that any of that retail side, the real time side is taken care of. But our fraud team is really good at understanding the various mechanisms and some of the attack vectors that are being discussed on various platforms, social media, etc. And then coming to us and we have a chat around, okay, cool, this is what's there. What can we do to offset that? What do we do to detect it? What do we need to do with our partners? And yeah, then just define some tactics to be able to see what we have to be able to do in terms of driving down that rate. But it's an ongoing battle, changes every week.
Yeah, if not every day, I'm sure. Interestingly, there seems to be a disagreement on is the amount of fraud increasing overall, or is it holding steady or decreasing? I'll hold back my opinion for a second, but what's your perspective on that? Do you feel like as an industry you see fraud risk increasing, or do you feel like it's just the same, or it's holding steady but different kinds?
So, Scott, yeah, fraudulent actions are probably holding steady. What we're seeing a lot more of is what we call policy abuse. And for a retailer such as us, the ability to purchase online and then return, and whether the return item is an empty box, a box with bricks, it actually just isn't done. There's someone that's been colluding with a courier partner, whatever it is. We're seeing a lot more of that, and yes, that ultimately does turn into fraud. But because it's not fraud on the transaction at that point
Right.
in time for some reason or another, the feedback loop into your fraud providers is tricky because it's always going to be manual when it's in the real world. Um, so we reliant on our fraud operations team to be able to feed that back into the loop. But similarly, other merchants doing the same thing with their various providers. Because yeah, whether it's called friendly fraud, non-fraud, item not received, whatever it is, there's a hell of a lot that's problematic in that particular space.
Yeah, I think that's consistent with probably what I've heard the most from others as well, whether they're in the retailer side of things or even on the financial services, the banking side of things. A lot of the increase in fraud is that friendly fraud, right? It is it's not transaction fraud in the sense of, a bad actor stepping into the transaction and somehow pushing something through, but it is more of the end customer or entity actually committing fraud, called first party fraud, et cetera.
Yeah,
And that it's always much more challenging because then you're potentially interacting with a legitimate customer and trying to determine was this actually fraud or not, as opposed to knowing that you're targeting a bad actor, right? Which makes it a lot harder to both tease those apart and to apply the appropriate, outcome or consequence.
yeah.
Depending on the analysis. But one of the other things that I know you guys were an early adopter of buy now, pay later, and that certainly is a topic that again has gotten a lot of varied kind of points of view over the last couple of years. How did you decide to get involved in offering that as a payment method? How's it worked out? Has it been a successful one for you guys? Just maybe some perspective around that.
Yeah, look, I mean, ASOS in various guises has been using buy now, pay later since about 2014. So long history in that space. Um, it's been beneficial, is the long and the short. So you consider, so once again, pure e-com play. We don't have any physical stores, so there isn't a place where you can go and try on our outfits. And ASOS was early driver around things like free refunds. But the aim was for customers. It's not refunds, sorry, not free refunds, free returns.
Yeah.
Free refunds would be great. Uh, Free returns and the ability to get the customers the safety and the trust in the brand that yeah, we can try something on, we can go down this particular path, and we can actually get these items, try them on, and if they're not right, we can return them. Buy now, pay later just sort of stand on top of that, where I'm not out of pocket for 30 days. I've got the ability to try it on. And if something doesn't go right, then brilliant, send it back. And I only end up paying the 50, 60, 70% of whatever it is that I've kept. Um, that drove some really great behavior in the early days. And in all fairness, it's a good relationship and something that we really do focus on at the moment. I mean, it's one of the big things that we've got across, notably in the European sectors. There have been challenges, and part of them we touched on a little bit earlier around um, just policy abuse and things like outfitting, where there's a high proportion of individuals, and even in these instances where they go and they'll not high proportion, apologies. There's a proportion of customers that will go down the path of purchasing items, buy now, pay later on the Thursday, get it on the Friday, return it on the Tuesday, Wednesday, and it's been used in outfitting. And that's something that's just completely unprofitable from that perspective. High return rates in those very small cohorts can they create incredible fiscal drag. And focusing on it has led to us changing our view around those sort of customers and the type of payment options that we then offer. Now, worked incredibly closely with all of our buy now, pay later partners on this to explain this is what we are doing, are the mechanisms you can put in place, we can put in place, and how do we go about making sure that it works for both of us? Because at the end of the day, we don't want the relationship to sour, nor do they want us to go under for any reason. Not going to go under, but it's basically our success ultimately drives theirs too. But we've got to do it in a sustainable manner. It's got to be profitable, not just for the payment provider, but absolutely for the merchant. And being able to identify and adapt has been key to what we've been doing, notably over the last 16, 17 months. So that's changed quite a bit in terms of the way that we do utilize it.
I think that's an interesting takeaway. I wouldn't have thought of that, of the adjusting the payment method availability based on the behavior of the buyer, or profile of the buyer, et cetera. Certainly, I would think of that from a risk standpoint, right? There's plenty of times you would offer certain payment methods based on a risk profiling of the transaction, but in the context of the buyer profile, that's an interesting that feels definitely like advancement, right? That feels like a more sophisticated way of thinking about how you both de-risk but still offer, options to customers.
And look, I mean, it's around the options, because it's not a bad payment type. I mean, we do see really good behavior for the vast majority of the
Right.
population. It's just unfortunately small cohorts that ruin it for everyone once again. We haven't gone, and we're not considering going down the path of other merchants that have offboarded and have gone back to more traditional and incumbent providers exclusively. There's a good partnership, and it's not something we want to shift away from.
Yeah, no, that feels like, again, that feels like the more sophisticated approach is to adjust it to serve the business the right way. But customers clearly want to leverage that as a payment method, and there are plenty of good examples of where it works well. So I like the finesse in that approach, as opposed to just turning it off if you had bad behavior. I guess as we look to wrap up the conversation, just kind of looking ahead a bit, what's the next big thing, right? What's the thing that you're just starting to work on, or that you see coming that maybe you aren't quite incorporating yet? But as you think about kind of the horizon of the payment space and marketplaces and all the things coming, what's the next big problem to solve or innovation that's going to change the industry or thing that gets you excited?
Um, Very unsexy, but it's still fun. From time to time, there's a hell of a lot of focus around risk management, fraud management, regulatory and industry compliance, and how they're
Great.
going
That
to
is
be
not fun, just to be clear. But I'll let you go on. But yeah.
how do we get about doing it without unduly impacting our customers? I think that's one of the key things. It's the simplification of something that could be complex. Um, Regarding payment trends, always paying attention, while not necessarily applicable to ASOS due to our smaller basket sizes, something like Save Now, Buy Later. I'm quite interested in seeing what that does in the growth in the market. Always watching the likes of crypto and CDBC, goes back to some of the work that I was doing within the financial services company, and they unfortunately just don't have the market penetration for us to consider them. Account to account payments, and I know there've been quite a few changes in the US, but they are interesting, notably in the UK. Open banking, while it's not a new thing, it's now hitting those numbers where it really is something we need to pay attention to. That being said, from a customer protection point, and in all fairness, a merchant protection point, there are a couple of holes that are there, notably around dispute resolution, that I'd like to see shored up before we really dive into that, because there are a couple of operational concerns that we've got internally that we need to adapt to in order to be able to adopt those. And then it's also different maturity levels around the world, depending on where you go. Um,
Yeah. I
some of
think
the
that's a great call out on
installments
the
that you're starting to see with the card providers, banks. So the pay in installments, it seems to be, oh, that's absolutely a response to buy now, pay later, and its use. But the reality is the behavior is different, and what we are hearing from our partners that have implemented in various ways, it's not being used for small items. Once again, it's being used for things like holidays, large deposits, large homeware purchases, that you want to break up over 3, 6, 9, 12 months, versus the outfit that I'm going to be wearing for the wedding next weekend.
right.
Um, yeah, so those are going to be interesting ones. I know there's still absolutely an embedded finance play in the B2B spaces. I think the key thing is which of those providers, and I know they should and are integrating with various platforms that are already integrated into businesses, um, versus trying to get into the merchants directly, because that's always going to be a point. But if you can go into an ERP or a CRM and can be utilized from there, that's where I do think there's going to be a hell of a lot of growth and benefit. Other trends we're watching very closely, wallets and their growth. We're seeing a growth in wallet use, notably from big tech companies. Massively interested in what the scheme's click to pay does and how that grows. If there's a mandate to the issuers to adopt it, yeah, it'll be a much slower burn, but it has the opportunity to absolutely take a large slice of the pie in a number of years. But yeah, then more locally, just watching with the response that we've recently seen from PSR, and the FCA around call for information on big tech providers and what their offerings are going to offer and what it could do from a competition perspective.
That's an incredible list. That is, I agree with all of those things. And I think quite a few of them are things that are going to play out over the next, 2 to 3 years as we see what actually gets traction and takes hold. Which of these, especially we look at things like the pay by bank and some of the methods around account to account. I think there's a lot on the back end of those transactions, as you alluded to, that hasn't really been worked out, and that needs to kind of be built into the ecosystem. So as we started the conversation, I think that's what's exciting about this space, right? Is there's
Yeah.
constantly new things to, despite that we're still just trying to facilitate, money moving from one entity to another. There's constant new ideas, complexities, things to solve for that get introduced into the space, which make it so fun. So exciting to hear about some of those things. Um, I think that's going to be it for today's episode of Payment Talks. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and a big thank you to you, Justin, for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and stay updated with the latest in payments innovation. And we are available on all the podcast platforms. Links are in the description. And until next time, I'm Scott Harkey, and thank you.